Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back. Please take your seats. Hope you had a nice lunch. So let me just check in. Are we all okay? Yes. Can anybody learn something new so far? Yes. Yes. Live in Europe, invest in America. That's one thing I wrote down. Anybody met somebody new? I hope so. Yes, it's all about making connections between ideas and between people to fuel our creativity in these complicated times. There's plenty more to come on our agenda, from football to philosophy and finance. And next, we're going to explore the path to an equitable and prosperous future for everyone. We're joined by, I'm really excited about this session, we're joined by two of the most exceptional leaders, each bringing their own unique experience and perspectives. First, I'm delighted that Alphabet and Google's President and Chief Investment Officer and Chief Financial Officer, Ruth Porat, is with us. She's constantly in dialogue with policymakers, business leaders across sectors and across countries, and particularly focused on economic growth, job creation, and opportunity through technology. Now, Ruth joined us at Google in 2015 after a decorated career at Morgan Stanley. And under her leadership, she's helped ensure Google's making the right long-term investments in people, in products and infrastructure with the right ambition and discipline, particularly supporting the work we talked about earlier this morning in AI. And Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and Chair of the Sustainable Development Group is Amina Mohammed. When she first joined the United Nations in 2012, it was her who led the process that resulted in the creation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the global agreement of the 2030 Agenda for those sustainable development. Then she served as the Minister of Environment for the Federal Republic of Nigeria before returning to the United Nations as Deputy Secretary General.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us. We have so much to cover, so I am going to dive right in. But before I get to the topic for today, the Sustainable Development Goals, given the extremely tragic state of the world, I want to start with peace. And in July of last year, the United Nations came out with the new Agenda for Peace, a report and some recommendations. And this was really obviously on the back of Ukraine, Russia, and then short 3 months later, we had the horrific attack, Hamas attack, and now the tragedy, the humanitarian tragedy in Gaza. So one of the key elements clearly for peace is building more resilient societies, and we'll get to that. But can you start with the new Agenda for Peace? Take us through what guidelines you're recommending, the changing, evolving role for the United Nations.
Thank you so much, Ruth, and great to be here with everyone. The new Agenda for Peace is very much a part of one of the key aspects of the Summit of the Future. We were looking at the United Nations 75 years later, what needed to change. And certainly what we found looking around Africa, the event of Ukraine, and of course Israel and Gaza, is that we were no longer having any peace to keep. And we needed new responses, new structures, and new strategies for addressing prevention. Addressing the governance of peacekeeping operations, looking at the way that we funded them and how they were staffed, and really just taking a look at mediation and prevention in deeper ways than we had done before. And these are some of the recommendations that we've made. Of course, this has been a response that we've had for a good number of years, and so structures and mindsets have to change. We have to bring in what more we have today of the knowledge of these conflicts and how difficult they are, what learnings that we have. But it is essentially just completely repositioning the UN on peacekeeping, political offices that will look to mediation, good offices, and how to prevent before we get to a stage of no return. And this is what we're finding in many countries now, that we just can't get the world together to respond to what the average person would think is absolutely a no-brainer, and why can the UN not do that? So,
and obviously, resilient societies is a critical element of that, and you discuss it in the report. So let's go to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. 190 countries, 17 goals. 169 targets. I think if we took a quiz of everyone in the room, it might be hard to get all 17 and 169 targets, but we can work on it. But the goals are importantly so linked, as you and I have discussed. It is climate change, leads to food security challenges, leads to migration challenges, and even to war. And so I think it's so beautiful the way you can help us lens out and understand the framework for thinking about the SDGs. And if you could share that with us.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the important things to note is that it took us 4 years to get a response that the world believed they could own. That's the world. It's not the North, not the South, East or West. It's the world. So a global response, there's not going to be a neat set of goals. And I think that this is what everyone found real trouble in trying to grasp which goal is your favorite goal. It's like asking me which is my favorite child.
I will ask that, but go ahead.
Okay. But I think what we tried to do here was that the conceptual paradigm shift was to do more than just the social agenda of the MDGs, a move to sustainable development. And that really is about 3 strands of DNA. It is about the social and the rights agenda. So it's almost the unfinished business of the MDGs. It's about an inclusive economy. And if you look at goals 7 to 15, you see the investment opportunities in that. It's about climate change and the actions that need to be taken, which are reflected in all of the goals. But it's also about 2 important pillars that hold these goals up. And one of them is, of course, peace and strong institutions to carry this off, and the partnerships in this room, for instance, that we need to get together to deliver on the SDGs. And each SDG, I mean, it did take time. There are people in this room who took part in even the design of each one of those icons. And so they're helpful to brand and to explain, but as a whole, when a government has to take this as a framework, it is better to say inclusive economies, and if we invest in those economies, we will have the revenues to pay for the first 6, and we have to make sure that we're holding them up on partnerships and institutions that have the capacity to deliver.
Excellent. So I think one of the things that's so frustrating and striking is that we're now, as you've spoken quite a bit about, we're now past the halfway point for the goals. Mm-hmm. And yet only 15% of the targets are on track to be achieved by 2030. And more than a third of the goals have actually had no progress or even regressed. And clearly no company, no government alone, bringing in civil society, no one alone can tackle this. It really is about the collective strength of what we're doing. And given the extraordinary group we have here, if there was a call to action, what do you want people in this room to take away as to how they can help take that 15% of SDGs on track and move that forward aggressively?
I think first things first, it is an action that you need to take at the country level. This is not something that's going to be taken in New York or in London. This is a country level activity. Ask yourselves what business you're in, understanding the goals, and what investments would you encourage or would you participate in at the country level. To make that simpler, because I think this has been, most people say, so what does that mean? Of food systems, from the time that you produce till you put it on the table, there's a whole ecosystem of activities in that that produce food, and to think about how you would engage with that. Food is an important part of food security issues, because since COVID, we have seen the crisis of food, of Ukraine, food, even Israel and Gaza, when we see our supply chains disrupted by the activity from Yemen. So I would say for that, you also need to look at energy. Energy today is also a security issue, but how can we get it to our communities? And if we're looking for transitions to sustainable energy, then you can see that food is produced at the local level. If we want to power it, let's go off-grid. Let's use solar power. Let's use all the other sustainable power that we can for it. We need to connect people with markets and financial services, and that is about our women. It's about young people. And that has to be done with connectivity and technology. So just those 3 alone, you can see how much one has an opportunity to invest. That's investing in countries. It's not always easy, because many of these countries don't always have the enabling environment for that to happen. That's not an excuse. This is something that we're working on the finance part of the agenda for Summit of the Future, that says we need to open access to financial markets for longer term and concessional funding to invest in these sectors. And that's hard, but I think we are talking to credit rating agencies, we're talking to multilateral development banks on how they can be more efficient and leverage the resources they have to the countries. But I think bottom line, it's investing in countries and finding that space where you can be part of that partnership with countries to do this. At scale. This is not about pilot projects. We have the proof of concept that we've been working at for over 20 years now, so we know what to do. It's the scale and a sense of urgency. Shouldn't be done tomorrow, it needed to be done yesterday. If we had taken care of food systems and storage and supplies in the Horn of Africa, we wouldn't see that red line that we're almost crossing into famine. And we need to see that and to invest in it. Now, we might be told, well, it's not an enabling environment, but I can tell you there are people there. And there are local companies you want to de-risk. Local companies will work with you. The UN works in the humanitarian space on food. And these are also, I think, important aspects of de-risking an environment.
So I feel strongly, and we've talked about it, that we're living in this extraordinary time with the advent of AI and the ability in particular to apply AI to a lot of the issues that you've talked about. We just came out with a report, which hopefully everyone will get a chance to read, in which we're talking about how today at Google we are using AI to apply against some of the biggest social issues that need to be addressed in food security, in health. Like the fact that today we can actually diagnose diabetic retinopathy, we can prevent blindness through early intervention is extraordinary. These are not science fiction out there tomorrow. To your point about health, food security, climate, there are solutions today. And that motivates us, and I think your point is very well taken. We need to focus on those where we can have impact working with you and others at scale. As you think about the application of technology, you somewhat touched on it already, what are you most excited about when you step back and see the various efforts going on across the SDGs?
I think there's so many entry points, but for me, perhaps the low-hanging fruit of all of this is education. And it's education about those that are missing because they've had such poor quality education, they can no longer join the market or have the skills to do so. And I think that with technology, with AI now, you can leapfrog that and you can put them back into reskilling for the market that also has moved ahead with technology. So for instance, we have many surveys that show you that young people are not interested in becoming a teacher or a farmer. But today, when you see the opportunity of a smart farm and how you can connect that to market, and you give the skills to young people, they are far more engaged with doing that than they would have been before. And I know that there are questions about what jobs come in, what jobs come out. But, I would say in many of our countries, the jobs are not to be had. So it is an opportunity to create a new market, a new space, and to be hopeful and to connect those that are less privileged and haven't had the access to what the rest of the world is doing. But I would also say that in education, teachers, we've just had a high-level panel on teachers. And I have to tell you, they were the first to push back against technology. But we had two amazing former prime ministers who worked at this with them and over a period of a few months came back with some really good innovation where teachers now will use this technology where classrooms may not necessarily be physical, will be virtual. What's exciting about that for me, we are together, I see Malala in the front row here, still fighting the fight for girls to get back into school at secondary and tertiary level in Afghanistan. In the interim, you can't leave them without an education. So technology allows us to say, okay, online, what can we do? How can we fill that gap while we're still fighting for their right to education, as all other girls in the rest of the world? And I think investments there need to be seen at much larger volumes than we're seeing right now, and not so difficult to do. I think, we saw from COVID how quickly people could be turned online, and we need to see that now. We saw it in Ukraine. We need to see it in Palestine. We need to see it in Sudan, in many more of the humanitarian crisis areas that we have today. So I see that. I mentioned earlier to you on health, one of the most exciting things for me there was that many people can't come to the primary health care center. And so what do? You need to take health to them. And we did this with community health extension workers across Africa, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Senegal. But still, there was a diagnosis at that time that had to be done in a laboratory for malaria. So you had to come. But today you don't. The kits that technology has been able to develop, and a community health and extension worker that can go now to the field and take health and have that diagnosis done, and with a cell phone, put that information back in the system. So you begin to see a real reflection of a disease burden in a country, which saves you enormous amounts of money, because before we threw it at the problem, knowing that it would definitely never be wasted, but it was not strategic, it was not efficient, we did not make the savings we needed for other diseases. So again, technology is bringing efficiencies into many important spaces.
On health, I think it's one of the most exciting applications of AI, and what we're seeing is the ability, in particular for early diagnosis, is absolutely extraordinary. I was speaking with one of the leading oncologists in the States, and his comment is the only way to democratize healthcare, the way that anyone anywhere around the world can get the same sort of early diagnosis we get, is of course with AI, because it leverages any doctor, any practitioner anywhere around the globe, and the opportunity to work on that is so profound. We're so honored to have Malala here with us today, and would like to invite her to comment as well, having been in the room when the SDGs were actually born, and given your comment about education.
Yeah, she was. I have to share this with you, because she was. We have this General Assembly, old hall, and all the member states are seated downstairs. But upstairs is a visitors gallery, and you look down. But this was an amazing opportunity for Malala to stand up in the gallery and tell them what for. It was a momentous, occasion when we gavelled the SDGs. So really happy to have had you there.
Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I remember there was a lot of noise in the UN General Assembly, so I had to call everybody to keep quiet and listen to the voices of children and girls. It's important because they are the future, and when we ignore their education, it costs them. We are costing them their present and their future. And when we talk about sustainable development goals, when we talk about a more equal and sustainable future, we have to look at the education that we are giving to our children, and we also have to look at how we are letting millions of children, hundreds of millions of children, miss out on their education as well. There are more than 120 million girls who do not have access to schooling. Afghanistan right now is the only country in the world that has imposed a ban on girls' secondary and tertiary education. And at the same time, we're witnessing these conflicts and crises in the world where schools are destroyed and damaged, and children just miss out on this normal life that every child deserves. In Gaza, I think almost all universities have been bombed, and more than 80% of the schools are fully or partially damaged. It's so hard to see a future for these children without an education, or with such a destroyed, almost no infrastructure for education anymore. So it does concern me when we look at these human-made and at the same time natural causes as well, such as climate-related events like floods, and how they are impacting and just washing away so many schools, which we saw in the floods in Pakistan just, I think, a year or so ago. So there are many challenges to education, but I do believe that we have to treat this as an emergency and urgent crisis. We should not put it aside. Girls in Afghanistan have not been in school for almost 3 years, and it costs them. It costs them their future. So many of them are putting their lives at risk to find a way to escape and to get an opportunity to learn in other places. And the girls who were lucky enough to get out of the country, they were either part of the women's soccer team or the women's robotics team. They today are getting into Harvard and these different universities. They are playing for a local club in Australia. So you can imagine the two different realities. If this woman had stayed in Afghanistan, her life would have been completely different to where she is now, where she can have her normal life. So I think it's just this right to your human rights, this this existence which is denied to so many girls and women. So I know Amina Mohammed talked about the future of education already, but I would love to hear more about, the Transforming Education Summit and the Future Summit as well, and, how do you see the future of education, especially in the context of these global crises?
And if I can thank you, first of all, so much for all that you do, for your voice, for your leadership. If I can build on her question, if you can take us through the Summit for the Future and what you're hoping to accomplish there with the UN General Assembly this year.
Well, thank you, Malala. I always say I want to be like you when I grow up. But 2 points just to really underscore the importance of having women in decision-making and in leadership. In both cases that Malala spoke about, men go to war, women make peace. And I think if you look at that around the world, tell me which woman went to war beyond Helen of Troy. But really, yeah, you're going to say that. But I think it's important here because it really is very difficult to get around the table pathways to peace when you are speaking with men. And I've been at many peace tables, and just because I'm the Deputy Secretary General, but there are no women there. And yet women bear the brunt of war. Men come back as heroes. Women come back as damaged goods and often discarded. And I think it's important for us to know that this is about our humanity and about human dignity. On the side of climate change, I think it's important here that we also say that many of the issues and the decisions that are made for the position we find ourselves in today are also man-made. These are things that we can do something about. And I think that that's where global solutions to this crisis can come. So to the Summit of the Future, but also a very important part of it is the transforming education. And this is where we really were looking after COVID, that education wasn't working in the way in which learning societies were developing, and to really look to see the role of teachers, the curriculum, was the classroom going to be physical or virtual, and agreeing a number of issues around how to finance education. And those are what have been taken forward to countries to try to find those plans. I would say this is a generation of what we've got to do. We have to start somewhere, but it will take time to do because it should be that first call of your appropriation in government, health, education. So the Transforming Education Summit is about a whole of society. It's about learning societies. It's about when from the day we're born to the day we pass. I think we know now we're supposed to retire at 65, 70, but with health and with the way technology has come in, we are living longer. What do we do for the next 20 years? It's certainly not be granny. We've got to be part of taking that exposure, that experience, that work back again into the foundations of society so that we are better off for it. So that the Transforming Education, there'll be 4 summits this year. All of them will build to next year in the World Social Summit. Important dialogue, important decision-making, but mostly to push governments and communities and societies to make that change. For me, it's a big transformation of curriculum. And it's about making a fairer world for men and women and girls and boys through their whole life to have the same opportunities to learn and to be part of economies. On the Summit of the Future, 3 big headlines there for what we want to do. It is about an institution that was set up on the back of World War II. It worked. It produced the Marshall Plan. Germany, France, and many countries in Europe would not be where they are today if there was not investments in long-term concessional financing. I think it's only a couple of years ago that the UK just finished paying their debt to the monies made available to them in 1945. That signals to you that long-term financing is important. 75 years later, I think in most cases, shelf life expired. We are not fit for purpose anymore with how to deliver on the charter for people. We are different, we the people, than we were in 1945. We are more educated, more connected. There are more stresses and strains. It's a lot of power, but we are better off today than we've ever been. And so the Summit of the Future does speak about the peace agenda. It speaks about the new era of technology, for which is really important for us to engage with that. It also speaks to the financial architecture, which means we need access to more long-term concessional funding for everyone. Just as one side of the world had that opportunity, all sides need to have that opportunity.
And on the very important topic of education, you've so much touched on it. Every child everywhere around the globe has to have access to education, no question about it. And it doesn't stop there. Throughout our lifetime, we're living longer, the world is changing. We want to make sure that we're providing the skills people need to continue to thrive in an ever-changing world. Whenever I go around the globe and do work that was really pioneered here by Matt and the team around digital skilling, the thing that strikes me is that people not only comment on the skills that they've gotten through our Grow with Google program, but the confidence they have that they have a pathway forward. And so as we look at training for life, continuous training, digital skilling, and this question about the jobs of the future, how do you see the role that the United Nations is playing and what you want people in this room to be focused on?
Well, I see, first of all, the UN as our global town hall for this global village that we've got. It is a place that we need to come to because we need collective solutions to the problems we have. No one entity or constituency can deal with them. They are huge. So our footprint is not just in New York or Geneva or Vienna. It's in over 130 countries. And in those countries, the UN still has the integrity and the trust of government and of many. So what's our job? Our job really is convening the partnerships that are needed to bring investments to agriculture and food security, to energy, to climate action that needs to happen, to education. And that's what we're trying to do now. We do it around the framing of the SDGs because this is clearly a government remit. I think what we've not been as good at is communicating, not been as good at, we don't speak the same language as the private sector. In some cases, not even civil society. So we need to get better at that. But I think it's not, if you look at the SDG framing, it's not difficult to understand. I think take time to do that, and then what can you offer in terms of supporting countries to get to where they need to get to? It's good for business. It's good for the community. It's good for the world at large. And we see so many geopolitical tensions today for which, if we had dealt with the investments that are needed in development long ago, we wouldn't have had them. I come from a country, Nigeria. We birthed Boko Haram, a terrorist organization. But I will always tell you that terrorists are not born. I went to school in the very same place that we birthed them. But they are environments where governments create such that there are lack of opportunities, there's injustice, there's just no sight of a future or hope. And so you've got nothing to lose. And you're easy fodder for those who feel that they have a political opportunity to create havoc in your space. So we need to deal with root causes. It's harder, it takes longer, but the longer you leave them, the more difficult it becomes.
I'm going to turn to our friends here in the room, but I have one personal question for you. You've talked about the importance of having a transformational mindset. And I think for each of us, I find it fascinating to find out what happened early in one's life. What happened in your life before the age of 16 that helps us explain how you became this extraordinary leader that you are, how you became someone with a transformational mindset that is driving this kind of change. So go back, something before the age of 16, which you would say helps us understand how you became you.
Whoa, okay. My kids are not listening, right? I think first things first, the day I was born, breech birth, landed on my feet, and I've been there that way the whole time. That's my first. But I think second, being born into a family where we were 5 girls, so no boys. So my father was the endangered species. But he believed in the empowerment of girls. And he was always very protective of his 2 sisters and giving them the opportunities. So we grew up in a home where our worth was recognized. We also grew up in a home where, as a civil servant, it was about service. So I think what was inculcated in all of us was about giving. And none of us, I think if I look at all my sisters, none is a business person. Everyone is in a giving space. And I think that was part of what shaped it. My mother was instrumental to making sure that we were always head up, shoulders high, and even if you didn't have anything, you didn't show it. You just got on with it, and there was always a solution, there was always a fallback. So we never thought about failing, and never afraid of failure. It was part of learning, and that, I think, is always the case. Even in the UN, as I say, what is my one big wish is to leave it better than I met it. Am I afraid to leave the UN? Absolutely not. I'm in a hurry to go back to Nigeria. We've got a lot of problems there. And so that do the best where you are, and that this is a journey and that every step matters, I think was something that was taught to us very early on. And then I had a grandmother on my father's side who was just exemplary and just fighting for every right that there was around. We always remember that as children growing up and going home.
That's beautiful. Let me open it up. Questions from anyone in the room? Questions, comments? Yes.
Well, first of all, you're absolutely inspirational, so thank you for everything you do. My name is Juliet, and you mentioned earlier that you said that if all women, if around a peace table it was women rather than men, and I just wondered what it's going to take for that to change and how we as women can help affect that change rather than relying on men to make that change for us.
Good question. I mean, from the UN, we do, the Secretary General and I do with what we can. And so for today, we have half, in our leadership, half women, half men. It wasn't like that when we came, and decisions have been made differently, and the head of our peacekeeping may be a man, but the head of the political is a woman. And in many cases, what she says is the challenge is that leaders don't bring women to the table. So we have to talk to our member states. If you ever get a chance to speak to a prime minister or president, please ask them the last time they brought women to the table when they were discussing security, or actually they were their envoys when they went out to speak to people about that. In the UN, we do the best that we can. It's not enough. Secondly, I think what we have been able to do is that in every office now across the world, we're also 50-50. So in speaking to governments, women have got a chance now to influence those peace processes and to bring women in communities into the fray. But ultimately, when you're dealing between two parties, warring parties, it is the heads of those warring parties that take the decision to do it. I always say there's no space too small. Even if you're told that you're going to be a note taker, don't think that a note taker doesn't matter, because that's part of, really learning what each value, each link of that value chain is towards peace. And as long as you are delivering, people look for you. This is what I found. I think I stopped interviewing for a job a long, long time ago. I just got on with it. And if you deliver, people look for you. I don't think that, but I still think we have this big issue with women in the peace place. It's something that we want to do more of. And I mean, look at how many women are leading the organizations we have that had to do with Gaza. What was our major problem as the UN is that the people on the other side are men in cultures that will not deal with women. So even as we have a woman who's in charge of our mission in Afghanistan, it is the Taliban she has to deal with. And some days they won't see her, some days they will. And it's the same thing that we see now in the many conflict situations, even if we put a woman up. The patriarchal society, the sense of entitlement and power still exists. And so you have to break that down and break it down together with men. Because I think in many of these situations, when we speak to gender parity, equality, the role of women, men feel a loss. I'm giving up something. Well, it wasn't yours to keep to begin with. We're talking about having equal access to it. But we do need to say it isn't a loss, you're better for it. It's not a question of ticking the box that you've got 50 women and 50 men. It does bring a value to the table. We do think differently. We are not wired the same way. And you need both in order to get sustainability and a result that is good for everyone.
So if I can end us on that, you so beautifully said, no space is too small, no voice is too small. If I think of some of the wisdom that Malala shared with us throughout her life, every voice matters, we can each make a difference, and there are so many issues we collectively obviously need to address. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.